Hello, I'm Collins Andrews. I'm the current president of the Arkansas Academy of Computing, and I've got the privilege today to interview Bob Oliver, who's one of the founding members of the Academy. Bob's originally from Waldron, Arkansas. He's a 1956 graduate of the University of Arkansas, and while there, he was a senior scholar in the College of Business Administration. And then he worked for IBM for 35 years. He was a systems engineer, a systems engineering manager, a marketing manager, all that time in Little Rock. In 1993, he received the honor of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Arkansas Society for Computer and Information Technology. Bob's married to the former Betty Ferguson, who works for the University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service. She's a graduate of Ouachita Baptist with a master's from the University of Arkansas, and she's a member of the Arkansas Agriculture Hall of Fame. Bob's somewhat of an Arkansas computing legend. So when people talk about computing in Arkansas and they go back and talk about its roots, Bob Oliver is almost always mentioned. So Bob, let's get started. Can you talk a little bit about, before we get into the computing business in Arkansas, well, talk a little bit about your life before that started, before computing, you know, where you were raised, and really a little bit about your family background, about your parents and what they did and so forth.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I was born in Waldron, Arkansas, and my parents were raised in a small community outside Waldron called Jones Creek. They did not have the opportunity to go to high school. They went through the 8th grade at Jones Creek and never attended high school. My dad became a merchant there in Waldron. He had a grocery store and a furniture store combined, and he did pretty good. You know, we never had a lot of extra money, but he did pretty good. I attended Waldron High School from 1940 to 1952, and I was active in sports in junior high and senior high. I played football and basketball. I was a little better in football than basketball. In football, you just needed a lot of good strength, awkward strength. In basketball, you had to be pretty well coordinated, and I used to have a little trouble with that coordination. I was captain of the football team, president of the senior class, and I was also the valedictorian of the high school. And I thought I would probably want to go to college and play football or basketball. I was an all-district football player and an honorable mention all-state football player, so I had several colleges contact me, but I decided I needed to go to the University of Arkansas and major in business administration with a degree in accounting. So I enrolled in 1952, and I had a wonderful time in college. I really did. Here again, you mentioned some of my activities and so forth, and I took a course toward the end of my college career having to do with data processing or punch card equipment. Professor Walter Cole taught a little short course in the accounting machines back in those days, the 402, 403 accounting machine, and we learned to wire control panels and so forth. And I had the opportunity to teach that class when Professor Cole became sick one part of that semester. And I can't remember how many times I taught it, but I really appreciated that opportunity and the confidence he had in me. And that was really when I first developed an interest in what IBM called unit record accounting, the punch card and the equipment.
So did you originally think, what was behind your original decision that you wanted to go to Arkansas and wanted to be in accounting? What were you expecting to happen as a result of that, back before, early?
Well, thought that I should go to the best college in Arkansas, and I considered the University of Arkansas to be the best college, although Hendrix had a lot of appeal to many people as being the highest academic school in the state. But I enjoyed the business part of my dad's work and so forth, and I just felt like accounting was more down my line than being a doctor or some other occupation that several people had tried to guide me into.
So they were actually teaching some technical aspects of accounting machines in the school?
Yes, we actually wired those control panels, and it was easy to for me to pick up. And you know, the 80-column card is here's an example of what we had back in those days.
That's outstanding. Were you what kind of student were you? Were you it sounds to me like you were diligent, but were you a good student or a hard-working student, or?
Well, I concentrated a lot on my studies the first year, and I wound up, I can't remember if I made all A's the first year or not, but it was close to it. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, I wound up as a senior scholar in the College of Business Administration. And so I was always conscientious about the work I did. But I also got interested in politics in college, and I ran for treasurer of the student body my sophomore year, and I won that position. One of the reasons I was interested in it was it paid about $300 a year, and I could use that money, you know, in attending college. And my junior year, I decided I would run for president of the student body, and I ran for president in the primary of one of our political parties, and I won that. But then when we had the main election, we had a law student by the name of Ray Thornton who showed up, and Ray won that race. But I haven't been too sad about it, because Ray has done so well in everything he's done. He was subsequently became a representative in the House of Representatives. He then became president of Arkansas State University at Jonesboro, and then president of the University of Arkansas. Mr. Green was a wonderful guy. I enjoyed working with him, and he would invite me out to have dinner with him periodically. And at that point in time, he had a little boy named Gary Green, running around. And lo and behold, Gary Green became a lawyer. And
but talk about what was the punch card for?
Well, the punch card, once you got the information in the punch card, once the holes were punched, the coding and all, of course, had to do with the punching of the card. There was 80 columns, and you could put 80 columns of information in a card. And you had to design normally several cards for each application or what you wanted to do. And if you wanted to sort those cards, you could do so on the sorter. If you wanted to interpret them and put the information at the top of the card, you could do that. And we then used the cards also to do the printing on the counting machines. And because the meter readers had to go out and read the meters every month, you know, we had to input the meter readings every month and then utilize the pre-punch cards with the name and address and so forth. But I can't remember what all the problems were, but we had, you know, people moving and that type thing, so it was not an easy installation.
What was IBM looking for in employees back then?
Well,
What was important to
IBM,
them?
back at the very beginning, IBM looked a lot for people in the business profession. When I was interviewed, mostly the people hired were from the business school. Later, when I became a manager with IBM, we changed our emphasis from the business school to the engineering school. And the ideal person for us at that time was a person with an undergraduate degree in engineering and a master's degree in business. He would know a little bit about the technical things, plus he would have that business background.
Can you think of any, a lot of times when folks get together who were in that business for a while, there are some stories they remember that are really significant and sort of shaped, I guess, the business and their opinion of it. What are some of the more significant things that happened to you, at least back at that time, early on?
Well, of course, that waterworks installation was really something. Like I said, I had to work day and night and weekends. I wired the billing panel for Arkansas Power and Light down in Pine Bluff, and I remember that was a challenge. The data processing manager was knowledgeable of board wiring, but he'd been working for about a month on the control panel, and he had not gotten it done, And so instead of trying to take what he had done, I just started all over, and I did it in about 2 or 3 days, what he had worked a month on. So I wondered afterwards why he didn't like me much, but it made him look kind of bad, I think, after that incident. But we were, friends and all after that.
You talked about, you made a couple of comments about working what I think are pretty long hours. Is there something in the nature of that kind of business? Can you kind of talk about what it was like to work and the time commitment it took, or the dedication, the attention to the customer, or something? There was something about that business that was unusual, I think.
Well, back in those days, of course, and I think even today, any data processing job involves long hours, because if you're writing a program, or you just don't want to stop at a certain point and say, well, it's 4 o'clock, I got to go home. So you like to get to a stopping point, and many times I have worked long hours programming and so forth, and I think it's just kind of the nature of the business that it requires long hours sometimes.
What then happened in your career after you were wiring boards and working on installations? Then how did your career evolve?
Well, in 1956, after I was hired, I advanced to various levels of systems engineering until I got to the top. And then we had grown to the point where we needed a systems engineering manager. So our branch manager at that time was Joe Henson, and Joe promoted me to systems engineering manager. And instead of going out and doing so much of the work, I became a more of a supervisor, but I was kind of a working supervisor for a while. And then as we got more and more people, I did less of the detail work. But at that point in time, we were getting out of the unit record equipment and getting into the computers. We had the 305 RAMAC, which was announced in, I guess, shortly after I went to work. I installed the first 305 RAMAC in Arkansas, which is a first random access device that IBM had at Ottenheimer Brothers, which eventually became Kellwood Company. And then the 1401 was announced in the late 1950s, and I learned to program in assembler and COBOL primarily. I never learned Fortran much. They had Fortran, for the 1401 also, but I never was scientifically oriented in that direction. Most of my applications were business oriented.
How did you learn the program?
Well, just attending school. You know, I learned assembler first, and that's pretty well machine language, what we call machine language. And then we migrated on to some additional languages that were a little simpler to write and not as detailed. And the one I remember using most was COBOL. Fortran I never really got into.
What was it like to move from being someone who was doing the work to being a manager?
Well, I guess I enjoyed being a recruiter more than anything else as a manager. I did not enjoy all the performance evaluations and all that type of stuff that a manager has to do. But I enjoyed the recruiting and hiring of people, and I built a good reputation within the company as being one of the top recruiters in our district. And I recruited with some of the, you know, guys from other offices in the company, and I had a good relationship with many of the professors at the University of Arkansas. Always trying to build a good relationship and hire the top students who had a lot of activities and leadership, and also had good personalities. In fact, the placement director up there called me in one time and said, Oliver, he said, all you're doing is hiring the brightest students that we have. He said, you know, I need to find jobs for the average student. And I said, well, you know, IBM hires some average students, but they don't hire them for the jobs that I'm looking for. They don't hire them in sales and systems engineering. So that ended that conversation, and I continued to hire the best people I could find.
How important was recruiting for IBM and for IBM in Arkansas? What was going on with that? I mean, did you hire a lot of people? And if so, why?
Well, back in those days, IBM was growing tremendously in the 1960s and so forth. And, you know, I hired as many as maybe 15 people in a year. And to find 15 people, I went to the University of Arkansas, and I went to the other major colleges in Arkansas. And I'm proud of the people that I hired during that period, the period of the 60s. That's when we hired the people who eventually started Axiom, Charles Morgan, Roger Klein, Jim Womble, and the people in Fort Smith started Datatronics. The people at Systematics, I didn't hire, but I knew them real well and worked with them some.
What do you think made you a good recruiter?
Well, those three things that I said I majored on was key, but also we gave an aptitude test. And that aptitude test was really helpful also.
How was that test used, and what did it measure?
Well, it measured your aptitude for technical things that would be required in the job of being an IBM salesman and systems engineer. And I would say that I hired some people because they had real high grades on that test, but were maybe a little short in the other areas, and they did not work out that well. I hired some people who had lower, or I missed some people who had a little bit lower grades on that aptitude test, but had those other good traits. And I can, you know, call some of their names. One of them became president of the telephone company here in Arkansas. I passed him because He did not do that well on the aptitude test, but he was very successful in the career that he eventually chose. Back in those days, as far as recruiting, you had to you were required to hire a certain number of minorities and a certain, change of sex, or the male versus the female, and it was tough sometimes, especially the minority recruiting. I found difficult, and I've hired several young men from the university. Then I hired several young men from the University of Arkansas in Pine Bluff.
If you were trying to describe what you see has changed about the computing business today, what are some of the significant things as you go through your career that really made a difference in the way computing was done?
Well, of course, the big one back in the 50s was the random access. Got away from that magnetic tape and more to random access. Then in the 1980s, when the PC was announced, that took away a lot of the, prior to that time, all we had was just terminals that could gather data from the CPU. But then after that, you could do a lot of the work on the PC itself, in addition to getting information and all from the mainframes.
How has that changed how businesses use computing? What do you see today that's different from the way it was, when you started?
Well, everywhere you look, you see computers in use. You go to your credit card accounting is very prominent. Everybody uses credit cards, so I'm trying to think of some other point of sale terminals, in the retail businesses. The doctor's records are now stored a lot on computers versus the big files they used to have, although my present doctor still has the big files, But I think computing is probably one of the biggest inventions that the world has ever seen. It's the automobile was tremendous, and computers have been tremendous, and the way that we use computers today, I'm a little backward myself. I've been out of the computing business since about 1997, and I find it difficult at times to solve some of the problems that come up. I'm not as technical as I once was.
What do you think about if you were talking to young people today about working in this business industry, profession, and so forth? What would you say are important characteristics today? You talked some about back when you started in it and hired people, but today, what should people try to work towards and learn to be effective in this business?
Well, as far as their background and all, I still think that business and engineering are still important, but I think their interest is really the key point. Are they really interested in computing? And some people just don't like it at all. Others just eat it up. So I think for those people who really enjoy it and show an interest in learning about it, they should look at pursuing a computer career. They're going to be successful. Those that they don't care about it, they don't need to get into it.
Who all, I know you've thought about this some for the interview, who all do you remember that you worked with, or maybe that you actually brought into computing, have had an influence in Arkansas in the computing business?
Well, we hired in the 1960s a large number of students, like I said, the fellows that started Axiom, Charles Morgan, Roger Klein, Jim Womble. And a lot of these people started with IBM, built their skills and all with IBM. A number of them left Arkansas and went into other bigger jobs with IBM. Randall Ferguson was a young black man that I hired from the University of Arkansas. He was a basketball player up there, and he became the branch manager of the Kansas City office, and he's done real well. I hired a young man by the name of Dick Anderson, whose father was the head of the Arts and Sciences department up there, Dr. Anderson, and he became, he went to our headquarters in New York, and David Ballinger was another young man that I hired from the University of Arkansas, whose father was Dr. Ballinger, the head of the music department, and David was a systems engineer here, and he took a different job outside of Arkansas with IBM, and I understand he's done well. Jim Heffley was another outstanding young man that became a manager here in Little Rock, and then went on to New York and wound up, I believe, in one of the Carolinas. So, you know, these guys have gone everywhere within IBM. One young man that I hired by the name of Randy Stewart was a top football player at the University of Arkansas, and he went to England with IBM World Trade. I haven't heard from Randy, but I know that he was influential in me hiring Charles Morgan. Charles told me here this year that he was trying to figure out where to go to work when he was a student. And he talked to Randy Stewart, and Randy said, I'm going to work for IBM. So that helped Charles make up his mind, and he came to work for us and worked several years as a systems engineer, and then started Axiom.
When you, some of the people that you mentioned worked for IBM for a while, and then they quit to go do something else, many of them entrepreneurial. Why do you, what was it that would cause someone to leave IBM at that time? And what would cause them to stay, I guess?
Well, you know, a lot of people, a lot of these Arkansas boys enjoy Arkansas and they want to stay in Arkansas. And I'm a good example of that. You know, I had opportunities to move outside of Arkansas back early in my career, but I chose to stay in Arkansas because I liked Arkansas. My wife had a good job with the Cooperative Extension Service. And I just decided that I was going to stay in Arkansas and make a career of it. And I was successful for about 35 years, but, and I think that's what's happened to these other guys. The Charles Morgans, Roger Kleins, Jim Wombles, Wally Andersons, many of the guys who went to work for Axiom, you know, wanted to stay in Arkansas. Systematics is another organization that hired quite a, you know, several of our employees.
What something you mentioned a minute ago about someone you hired whose dad, I think, was a music person. Have you noticed any connection between music capability and data processing capability?
You know, I really have. That's interesting you asked that question, because one of the highest grades I ever saw on the aptitude test was made by a young man at Arkansas Tech University. And that's one of the probably not too good of hires that I made because of that high aptitude score. But the other traits he had did not, you know, he was not one of our best salesmen and systems engineers, but he just blew the top out of that test. So in considering people, you've got to consider all those things that I mentioned.
Talk a little bit about the time demands of a career that really is a profession like this is, and your home life and the balancing of family responsibilities and home responsibilities with working. How did you deal with that?
Well, my wife and I never had any children, so I didn't have the problem of having to be with children, so I could devote a lot of time to these difficult installations as far as evenings and weekends when required. But I can see where it could be a problem with some families, you know, the demands of the job.
What's important to you other than working? And as you went through this career, what was important to you other than working? What did you spend your time doing other than when you were working on the lawn install?
Yeah. Well, I have always been very active in my church, the Baptist Church, and it has played a key part in my life. At the University of Arkansas, I was very active at the Baptist Student Union. And when I came to Little Rock, I joined the First Baptist Church, and I've been a member there for many, many years. I left briefly when my wife and I got married. We moved to Lone Oak because that's where her job was, and I commuted to Little Rock. So, but that was only about 6 years, and when we came back, we joined the Park Hill Baptist Church for a short period of time, but then eventually moved back to First Baptist in Little Rock. We have always committed a lot of our resources, both our time and our money, to church-related things. I was a deacon at First Baptist Church. I was treasurer of the church, and also on several key committees like personnel and so forth. And I found them difficult. You know, those committees were difficult at times, but we have always given anywhere from 15 to 20% of our income to charities. Now, not just the church. You know, our church demands or requires, would enjoy our giving 10%. But we've also been very supportive of Ouachita because we feel like they're building preachers for us and building a lot of good Baptist people in the future. And we've given several $100,000 to Ouachita in the form of scholarships. At the University of Arkansas, we've done similar things, although it's not all church related up there, but we've been very supportive of the 4-H program up there. We've been supportive of the 4-H program down here at the 4-H Center, and we donated rooms at the Old Main Restoration. We donated a room for the 4-H Center, so we've given several $100,000 to the university. So we try to kind of split between those two and then the church. And like I said, we're very committed with our resources.
If you were to, given that this is an interview that's hopefully will be available for research for people for years to come, if you were to say some opinions of yours about really the computing business in the past, what would you try to say is the most important about it? I also then want you to follow up with what about what you see happening in the future. But what are the most significant things that you can say about this business and what you learned and what's important for it?
Well, I think IBM always had a high reputation for business conduct, and I think that that taught me a lot and fell into really my background. That's the way I was taught, you know, to always be honest and straightforward and try to do the right thing for the customer. The future, I really, I've been out of data processing now since 1997. I worked for IBM until 91. Then I worked for the state for about 6 years, primarily in the Department of Computer Services. And then I went to work with the Arkansas Baptist Foundation as a volunteer. And that has increased my interest in being charitable toward church-related activities.
I know you brought some material with you. Is there anything that we have not talked about that you think we should talk about?
No, sir. I think we've pretty well covered it. I've enjoyed talking with you, and is there anything else you'd like to ask me?
It does seem like that a lot of our conversation has centered around the business and personnel aspects of our industry rather than the technical aspects. Do you think there's a reason for that?
I do. I was not all that interested, quite honestly, in the technical aspects of the business, and I have not continued with a lot of these tablets and things that a lot of technicians probably enjoy. Since I have been out of the IBM business and so forth, data processing business, I've concentrated more on the stock market, and I have done, fairly well. In 2008 and 2009, I thought I was going to go broke with, all the things that were happening then, but things have gotten better, and my wife and I are leaving most of our resources, since we don't have children, to primarily the 2 universities, after we take care of some of her nieces and nephews' problems, to Ouachita and University of Arkansas.
I got one more question that I kind of thought of as we're sitting here, and we talked about that briefly before you started the interview. It seems to me that IBM in particular, and maybe the computing business itself, has had a pretty strong influence on company behavior and company cultures. It seems to me that IBM had a unique company culture that has then influenced other companies. Did you observe that? And if so, what was so unique about it that has had such an influence on American business?
Well, when I went to work in 1956, Tom Watson Sr. passed away, I believe, in June of that year. So Tom Watson Jr. became the chief executive officer. And I always had the highest respect for him. And respect for the individual was what was one of IBM's chief things they talked about. And I think they pretty well followed that until things got tough at certain points in time, and they had to release people and so forth, and come up with ways to, buy them out and so forth. So I think respect for the individual kind of went a little bit awry there, but generally, I'd say during my whole career, the respect for the individual was there, and I had the opportunity to hear Tom Watson Jr. speak a number of times, and I won a trip to New York and all for my performance, and had the opportunity to have dinner with him.